February the 8th, 2025. Well, Trump continues to dominate the news. I seem to be making a lot of videos about him and his actions after becoming president again. Of course, the big one I think that's kind of big stir and has kind of calmed down, but was sort of interesting was his proposal on the situation in Gaza, which I had to. Maybe they said that Netanyahu smirked a little bit. Well, maybe I did too. From perhaps, well, maybe the smirk is something different than what people are thinking. Let's realize that this is something that almost certainly is not going to happen. Now, that's the question. Is of course question one is does Trump realize that something is not going to happen, or does Trump actually doing it, knowing it's not going to happen, and have some other motivation for doing this, which is interesting. He certainly raised the real issue, though, and that is, okay, the whole place has been desolated by the conflict over the last 15 months. There is all sorts of buildings that are still standing, but are too unstable to really go into safely. Others that are, the rest have been totally demolished. And you have a significant amount of unexploded ordnance all over the place too, and you have a large number of civilians, including children and people not too experienced that kind of stuff, presumably, who will be going into these areas during the ceasefire. And well, you can see this is a dangerous situation for them too. And the basic thrust of what he's saying, which is true, is something I think I might have put it. Comment on X to that effect some months back or weeks back. I don't recall specifically. I didn't take the trouble to look it up. I know I was thinking it, which goes along the following line. The only way to really solve this problem is to separate the Israelis from the Palestinians. You can't push them together and not have a conflict, okay? It's just simply a reality, I think. I don't think that there are certainly Palestinian extraction Arabs that are Israeli citizens, and I think more or less get along okay. But if you're talking about these, the terrorist groups, your Hamas and other groups of that sort, I just don't see much likelihood they're going to get along too peacefully. I mean, and the bottom line is that if in fact what he was proposing, I think, is instead of spending the Arab nations, that is from the Gulf, which is probably most of what we're talking about, spending billions of dollars to simply reconstruct the situation we had in Gaza before the October 7th, 2023 event occurred, and if instead they were to construct places to live elsewhere, my suggestion wouldn't be, certainly not Jordan, and I don't even think Egypt. I think Libya would be a very good choice myself. There might be other possibilities too, maybe Algeria or something. I mean, the idea is to keep them as far away from Israel as possible, and to provide them a very good life there. Then I think that most of the trouble would end. Now, then they get into the whole issue of, okay, that's ethnic cleansing, that's all that stuff. But if we just go and let history repeat itself, we know what's going to happen. They'll over the next, let's say, decade, they'll rebuild Gaza into kind of what it was before, and then there will be another terrorist attack, which will then set off another Israeli response, and we'll be back to where we are right now, a whole bunch of people getting killed, and a lot of damage being done, and nothing really moving forward. And so, anyway, but the bottom line is this has been soundly rejected by all the key players in there, except, I guess, Israel, which is just going to remain quiet, knowing what's probably going to happen. So they don't want to. I suppose Israel would be happy with it if we really did it, but there's a lot of problems. For instance, okay, right now there's thousands of armed Hamas fighters that are still in Gaza. And so I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. So that's one thing to consider. I mean, before, quote, we, the U.S., or somebody's going to take possession of it, they have a little different idea. So unless we're really going to replace the Israeli forces in there with U.S. forces, which I don't think we're going to do, that's going to be impossible to carry out any kind of process of the type that was discussed. But it is an interesting idea. I guess the other idea that some people, maybe Iran and maybe a lot of the more radical elements of the Middle East, maybe even a lot of the moderate elements for that matter, would like to maybe do the opposite, displace Israel. But the problem is Israel's a bigger country, and it also is heavily armed, including with nuclear weapons. And remember, one of the key things that people forget about U.S. aid to Israel and its history was when Israel wasn't nearly as well supplied by the U.S. as they are now. There was the thing that at the Yom Kippur War, there was a point where it was about to display their nuclear capabilities. And at the time, President Nixon decided that that would not be a good thing, considering how the Soviet Union at that time might react to it and what might drag us into. And so the decision was to provide them with all the conventional weapons they needed to win the war and stabilize the situation afterwards. And from that point on, there was an ongoing aid package that went in. And at first, these packages were largely done in order to buy various peace treaties, withdraw from the area around the Suez Canal, and you get a few $1 billion worth of stuff. Withdraw from Sinai, and you get even more. Make the peace deals, and they got even more. And then it just became a regular kind of $3 billion a year thing until this last fracas, in which a lot of money was provided. I'm not sure it's all military. I think a lot of it might be economic, considering the disruption of economies. But I don't think that's going to happen either. So, and the idea they're going to live together is very dubious. For one thing, remember, they had a chance for this under Clinton in 2000, the year 2000, where Clinton was making his bid for a Nobel Peace Prize. But instead, the Palestinian Authority launched a massive intifada, as they call it, of suicide bombings, which went on for about 2 years. And all the constraints they generally complain about were largely imposed in order to stop that. So, so it goes. At any rate, I think this is an interesting thing. It's interesting to see where that goes or what the point is, but we'll find out more later and see if Trump really decides to put real pressure behind this, or whether this is just a feeler that kind of went out and went into wherever it went. So anyway, but if you like these videos, please give me a like. You can subscribe, and of course click the bell for notifications. Also, at the address below, you can follow me on Rumble. Yeah, so that's kind of the way that one goes. Now, on the other hand, you have the DOGE effort is going full scale with Elon Musk. And I guess the USAID issue is one of the big ones that's come up, where apparently there was a large amount of interesting developments were found in their spending plans. They were, apparently funneling money in left-wing media outlets in various ways, buying expensive subscriptions to the Politico, for example, probably more than anybody needed, right? And things of that sort. And a lot of other things, various weird, onesies and twosies all around the world, teaching people in various backwater countries how to use the right pronouns, and just really kind of absurd stuff. So obviously that became a big cause celeb. But the other aspect, of course, that's going to turn out to be, I think a lot of it is the support for a variety of NGOs, which are actually working for like the CIA and stuff, front organizations. And of course, I don't know, a lot of them are probably trying to destabilize a lot of things in the world, create problems for people. And the question, I guess, is since Trump is running on a peace platform, do we want to stir up confrontations with all these other countries? I think Russia particularly, I think you can say, that was what Ukraine and then Georgia and so forth. That there's been a lot of activity there. And I hearing now that this is also getting into a lot of other areas, like, in terms of Medicaid and Medicare, not in terms of the benefits people get, but there's claims that there's been a lot of false payments being made. And I don't, that's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that development. Well, I don't know. I mean, I would say this from my own personal experience with dealing with things of this sort, particularly, well, certainly my mother and all back in the day, that at least under ordinary Medicare, not so much Advantage, but under an ordinary Medicare, you know, the rates that the government paid for things was actually lower than what you know, my corporate plans were paying for things. It would seem, from as much as I could, you know, put apples and oranges together and sort of still come up with something similar. I was probably paying more with an appointment to a general practitioner than my mother was to a cardiologist, for instance. So it just seems to me that perhaps, um, you know, I don't see that they're overall overpaying. So this would seem to indicate absolute fraudulent claims, although we don't know what that is, what they're really talking about yet. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out there. I'm thinking we may be getting into the issue of kind of for instance, you know, what does an aspirin actually cost in the drugstore versus what does it cost in the hospital, that kind of thing. So we'll see what they come up with. This is an ongoing saga. As I said in the last video, the adventure continues. And I hear they're looking at the Department of Education. Again, I'm not sure exactly what they're planning on doing with that, because, I mean, eliminating the department, then what happens to all the funding? In other words, are we going to cut funding nationwide to schools? Will that then lead to schools being underfunded, and therefore the property taxes are going to go up locally? I mean, that could have a backfire effect that the administration may not like. I mean, if you see what I'm saying. So, in a way, I think a lot of this stuff, he's kind of on a rampage, and we got to be careful here. And also, the Democrats have developed a strategy of two things. One, they're sounding as hysterical as possible. And of course, that's kind of, you know, completely crazy, of course. But the other thing we're looking at too, I think, is their legal strategy is the one that might have more impact, as they're continuing to find liberal judges, or at least judges that are, you know, alarmed at things, are putting a lot of stays on various orders that have been given. And of course, that may indicate that he's going to have to fight this thing all the way to the Supreme Court in many instances, because a lot of these things are being filed in, for instance, those filed in D.C., for example, go before the D.C. appellate court, which is loaded with Democrats, because of, you know, what happened during Obama and Harry Reid's restructure, ending the filibuster, the supermajority filibuster on appointments. They were able to then fill all the vacancies on that court up with liberal Democrats. So now you almost have to go probably all the way to the Supreme Court to deal with it. And of course, the Supreme Court can only hear so many cases at once. And what degree do they want to be on the front line on this? So I think it remains to be seen. I've been warning all along in my videos that I'm seeing a lot of this kind of litigation is going to be a detriment to what we're doing. Although, if we can get our budget bill through, I mean, a lot of this can be done by legislation when they pass the reconciliation bill, if they can pass it. And again, that's another problem we're facing, is, of course, we have, if we know in the last Congress was largely, our success was defeated not so much by the Democrats, but by extremely conservative Republicans who simply wouldn't compromise. And since they didn't compromise, what ended up happening in order to keep the government running, they ended up making a deal with the Democrats, and basically just passed the Democrats' previous bills as a what do you call it, under a continuing resolution. So in other words, we didn't ever pass our own legislation in the whole 2 years because we couldn't agree whether we're going to cut spending by 5% or we're going to cut it by 20%. Instead, we cut it by any percent, maybe increased it. And then, of course, you always have your ongoing natural disasters, which are, I guess, rational. You have to have humanitarian aid in these cases. But this is always often an opportunity to throw a lot of things in the pot that you can't really vote against, because you don't want to vote against the relief effort for all the victims of the disaster. And a lot of things that generally get passed during that are not necessarily what you really would want to be passed. So anyway, so that's kind of the way the whole thing is running, and I think Trump is getting a lot done, and we'll see how much the resistance will be able to be successful as court challenges, or what happens when it hits higher courts. And that's the state of play at the moment. So at any rate, I'll be wrapping this up for now. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. You can look for me posting most frequently on X. And so that'll be all for this time.